A big welcome to my regular viewers and listeners, and those of you who are joining us for the first time. It's Philip Bateman here. I'm the host of Smarter Impact and the managing director of Bravo Charlie. For the past 14 years, I've been supporting CEOs with their strategy and communication. And for the past 5 years, working mainly with the impact finance industry, helping CEOs tell the right story to investors. To coincide with this interview, I'm launching our Investor Trust Scorecard, so make sure you take 5 minutes to get your results and see how you stack up. Now, with that said, I'm so pleased to introduce our guest, Professor Durreen Shahnaz, and discuss her journey and her book as the Defiant Optimist, Daring to Fight Global Inequality, Reinvent Finance, and Invest in Women.
Thank you, Philip, for having me. It's really, truly an honor and pleasure to be here today.
Oh, thank you. And just as a little disclosure, yes, I've previously been a student of Durreen's and IIX and Measuring Finance for Sustainability and another impact in 2020 and 21, which was a brilliant part of my formative learnings about the impact finance industry. And you've had a massive cohort go through there, haven't you? What's the scale of that like?
Yes. So we have, the IIX Institute has so far over 9,000 students who have gone through it. So just I like to call ourselves, the quiet teacher, meaning that we have been able to, teach so many people about and share knowledge with so many folks out there. And it's been amazing because I think it does play an incredible role in building the ecosystem. So, it makes me very proud to see what you're doing. So it's and you're one of the 9,000, so it's wonderful.
You are an absolute powerhouse of winning the awards, as it were. 2020 Asia Pacific Women's Empowerment Principles Award, Sustainability Superwoman. You're in the Forbes 50 over 50 list, Oslo Business for Peace Foundation. Why do these keep coming into your field? What is it that you're doing that's keeping you up there?
Well, I think, honestly, I think it's not so much me being up there. I think there's a real hunger in the world to find people who are actually pushing the envelope. And I do feel that there's so few of us who want to take that plunge. But we all have that in us. And it just, who wants to kind of have that courage to take that leap. So there's so few of us out there who are doing it. So I do feel that when it comes to finding innovation, finding things which is actually making the world a little more inclusive, they keep on reaching out to IIX. So again, I don't see it as my award. I actually see it as the manifestation of the work that my colleagues are doing, and then also, frankly, the greater ecosystem, because we could not have done what we have done if we didn't have the ecosystem around us. And that's why I think the Institute for me is just so precious, because we do all these wonderful work and creating bonds and measuring impact and writing papers and, and so on and so forth that goes on. But what the Institute does is, again, it quietly just keeps on chugging along and making this ecosystem, stronger and stronger for us, because, again, it's a journey for all of us. It's a march, it's a movement. So I think it can't be just us alone doing it. So the awards, frankly, are just a manifestation of that. And I don't kind of focus on it that much, because for me, it really is the fact that, what's the next thing we can do to really push the envelope to make,
because I guess you can't get an award if you haven't done something. So you do the things and you get the awards.
I guess, again, I mean, it's great. Listen, I'm very honored that people come to us, but I think, once again, I think the work speaks for itself. You know what I mean? So I think we just have a lot of work to do.
And speaking of chugging along and the work, we're at the 5th release of the Women's Livelihood Bond, I believe.
Yeah, so we just had the 5th one in December. So it was 50 million. So now we have put out in the market close to $130 million worth of bonds. And God, Philip, and not a single default, and think about it. I mean, last year, like, the whole world was melting in terms of the financial markets, but we could close the bond and we haven't had a single default. And I always say, it really is because we just put so much emphasis on the impact measurement, the transparency around it, and really being able to link deep impact with lowering the risk. And we've been able to do that. It's one thing to talk about it, but, we have real money to prove it. And I'm really proud that also the 5th bond was also the first orange bond. So we have now introduced a whole new asset class called the orange bond, which basically is, what green was supposed to do for climate. This is climate plus gender equality. So that it's the nexus of it. So where it's basically women and gender minorities, given the equal opportunity. So we are extremely proud. And I think we're also proud, again, talking about pushing the envelope, especially, again, both women and gender minorities are, in a lot of the countries we operate in, are not the primary concern. So we are very, very happy that we can actually, push it and create a whole new asset class from the global south.
And for people who may be outside of the finance tent, when you say a woman's livelihood bond and $100 million and creating impact, how would I explain this to my mom? Like, what are we talking about?
Yeah, so I think the way to explain it is, first and foremost, I think for all of us, and including your mom, I'm sure is very aware, is the fact that the financial system, frankly, rules our lives. So no matter whether we like to talk about it or not, I mean, you have interest rate go up in the US and we all feel the pain, right? So finances are sort of the key to our, some ways, sadly, our existence. So the way the finance market works is that you have these bigger economies, who have this, we have this thing called, stock market and financial institutions where they play a big role in basically controlling that. So there's a lot of investments that happen, and in the finance market, it is sort of worth over 120 trillion dollars. And if you think about it, out of that, a fraction of that, probably less than $1 trillion, where retail investors like ourselves or your mom have a role to play, where we say, oh, I'll buy a mutual fund, I'll buy. So what that means is the rest of the money is really controlled by the markets, where all these type of investments are happening, be it in coal, be it in oil, and a lot of it, of course, also controlled and influenced by political systems. So for us, what we tried to do was really say, hey, if the financial markets are so powerful, how about trying to see if we can reshift them, at least starting to. I know it's like moving the Titanic, but it really is how to make them care a little bit more, right, about the world, about the people who are in it, about the environment that we're living in. So that kind of where, to put it kind of in a very simple way. And the bonds that we're issuing is a part of that fraction. You can see it's a drop in the bucket. But what it still does with that, we know that all it takes is the first drop, right? And you can keep on adding the drop, and you have a puddle, and then you have a little pond and all that. So that we're going after that. So it's a drop in the bucket of the financial markets, but it has a very strong message out there. The fact that you can have, a financial instrument that actually connects, the women who are in the last mile in the remote parts of the Philippines, of Indonesia, of India, etc., who are now part of the financial market because they are maybe taking a loan. That loan is then packaged, and then, as an investor, you're buying it. But they are actually repaying the loan that you are expecting the return from. So it's a wonderful way, it's a wonderful equalizer that we have created. But again, using very sophisticated finance, and connecting, as I like to say, the high finance to low markets. So yeah, so I think for your mom to know is, the world will change, and it is changing slowly and making finance do good.
Wonderful. And I really appreciate the pre-reader copy of the book.
Oh, good.
Just really stunning. Really,
oh, you're so
honestly,
sweet.
like I'm going through, and my partner Nick she's actually in the other room doing a coaching session. She's a women's empowerment coach and helps women deal with burnout and overload, and essentially how to lead a deeply satisfied life with so many competing priorities. And I kept grabbing pages and running in and being like, oh, you wouldn't read this. And we were reading it together and things. And it's such a deeply personal revelation.
Oh, you can't imagine how much I cried when I wrote the book. It was a lot of,
I mean, I didn't know what to expect, but I didn't expect that. So what I'd love to do is walk through some of the book with you and have you expand on a few moments of it and things, if that's okay.
Yes, absolutely. I hope I don't start crying, but yeah, absolutely.
We kind of were, there's definitely, when we talk about humanizing this stuff, and I mean, going right back to the start, you talked in the preface The unfulfilled dreams of the village women and stitching Nakshi Kantha, like these intricate designs into blankets, and then presenting these to the brides, which was really the transference of their hope to the women of the next generation. And it just struck me so much. I mean, when you saw that, was that, I think in two ways it was pivotal for you. One was like, I don't want to have unfulfilled hopes. And the other was, I want to help them realize their hopes. Could you tell me more about that?
Yes, I think, again, I think I was fortunate to be born in a generation which was really sort of in between, sort of, I guess, having hopes and having the ability maybe to kind of manifest that hope. So again, I am originally from Bangladesh and grew up in the post-war. My first memories are of the war, as you saw in the book. And this is the Bangladesh Independence War in 1971. And it really was very interesting. My grandmother was married off at 11. My mom was 18. My mom had some education. My grandmother couldn't, read or write. And so for me, yes, of course, I got an education. And for me, it was like, again, that generational, sort of upliftment through education and better opportunity. But I think I really felt this, again, being in a developing country, growing up in a country which was going through its own very intense challenges. I felt that, strangely enough, all the things that the country was going through, I could almost sort of at a very early age see that the women in our country, they were actually frankly going through that. And for me, it really was sort of saying, hey, I'm one of them, but I can try not to be, and just sort of break out from this and be able to come back and do something about it. And it really was that. And I think, yes, I start the book with the Noshikantha because in so many ways, it was just such a wonderful manifestation of what happens in so many different lives. And I think it's also, for me, the thing that I didn't write is the fact that how I'd be asked to come and stitch. And I was always, I'm not a good, I'm not good with my fingers in terms of sewing and all that. And I almost felt that it was unfair. Why was I being asked to stitch and not no male relatives in the family? So I felt that instead of sort of seeing this as a great opportunity to connect with the other women in the family, I was like, hold on, but this is not fair. Why do I have to do all the sewing? So, but I think you're right. I mean, I think it did influence me. It did stay with me, and I think I really felt everything coming in a circle when I spent time in the villages when I was with Grameen, on how, we all need some form of art, some form of expression. And those blankets were a wonderful manifestation of that. And so when I was writing the book, I almost felt like I was actually stitching a Nokshikatha through this book. Because there's so...
Nokshikatha, is it?
Yes.
Nokshikatha.
No, you actually are pronouncing it quite well. Because there's so many different stitches and there's so many different patterns in the book, and there's so many things I wanted to pull together, but I just wanted the blanket to come out nicely. And I think
I've got a question in here about what you didn't put in the book, because as you mentioned that, we leap forward to when you're in the field with Grameen and you're diffusing the situation with the villagers about the loans, because you that Defiant Optimist is threaded all through this. I mean, when you talk about your grandmother and being like your appreciation for catching her smoking, and that standing in the hallway like defying the army who were coming into your home during the Independence War, like all these little threads are just, it's such a caricature of a life that has shaped, in some ways, a hardness potentially that has kept you, seen you through.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, whatever said and done, I think we human, when we are born, I do think that we are sort of a blob of clay, and we are shaped by everyone around us, right? And while on one hand, I didn't want the life that the women in my family, women in my society had, on the other hand, I also found a wonderful way to almost celebrate the things I loved about, their ways. So, but it took me many years to step back and appreciate that, I have to say, and the book allowed me to do that.
You talk about transitioning to America and being around 20 years old, and you talk about your younger brother turning 15. And I quote you as saying, life was filled with lessons and fate was our duty to accept. in relation to
Right.
the care of your brother, but you weren't going to accept the sewing. Wonder what, like, was it the freedom of America that sort of opened you up to be like, well, I've got to take care of him. We're both here together, but there's enough of them back there. What is that tension?
I'm very surprised and I'm very pleased that you picked up on that. So I do think that, and this is a conflict that I think a lot of us have who are, Asian, and we had the Western opportunities to be in the West, right? Where we embrace everything of the West, which can allows us to have the freedom, to find out who we actually are, what our potentials are. But we all have, in general, I've seen this, an incredibly strong connection in terms of sense of duty. And I think I can't explain it. I mean, I've seen this and I saw it being manifested in so many pained ways, with a lot of my friends. But I think it is that, which is, I saw with my brother that he would have a great opportunity and, to come to the US, and I kind of bent over backwards to bring him, and he was my responsibility and I was going to take care of him. And I worked extra hours and to make sure he had everything. But again, it's not unique. I'm not unique in that at all.
This is the familial inclusion of
Exactly.
the global
Like,
south of Eastern societies. It's
exactly.
bereft of
And
it.
I think absolutely. And I think the reason also I use that story is, as you saw, as the book sort of develops, is that same theme, which is that sense of duty, that sense of responsibility, that sense of, thinking that this is actually my greater family that I need to do something about.
Yeah.
And I think um, this is not something that can be, I would say, you can force it on someone. It is actually something that is sort of gets manifested by, again, the imprints, and that sense of, I would say, I don't know, just being a part of the society,
The
right?
essence of
So
free will. I mean, you have the will to accept certain parts of your fate and not others. That's what makes you a defiant optimist, per se.
yeah. So I think, so I think in some ways, um, and I do think it is very, very interesting, where, a lot of people sort of keep on asking me, my God, there's so many opportunities you walked away from. Um, and I said, yeah, but I didn't feel that that was the way I could serve. So
Yeah.
I do think there is a strong sense, I think, in the book that there is a joy in service. There's a joy in being able to do something for others. There is a joy in actually making sacrifice for others. And I think that is something sometimes, I think, especially, I would say, and I wonder how the book will do, honestly, in the US, and it's being published there. Because sometimes in the US, that is something that's really missing, because it is a society, for very much individual freedom and individual will. So,
which is highly celebrated. I've been going there every year for the past 8 or 9 years. And as a resident of Australia, where we have sort of a more native kind of tall poppy syndrome around supporting individuals, in America,
right.
even though people will step over people in the street, obviously needing care, those same people lying in the street will celebrate the success, the American dream, per se. And it's amazing to me, and it's very disturbing, actually. I won't say amazing. I find it quite disturbing.
If you look at that on the flip side, the Americans are the most, in some ways, I think, again, I mean, if you count the dollars in terms of charity, and apparently they're the most generous. And again, maybe someone's counting for them, because of the taxes and all that. That makes sense. I mean, maybe other places are equally generous and it's not counted, but at least on paper, they are more generous than anyone else.
That is also my experience individually of Americans, of being highly generous, highly supportive people who are really enthusiastic. It's sort of like a media overlay I consume. Unfortunately, that makes me not have that experience with them on a sort of conceptual level. To move on, 2 points in this. I quote you again. How do you piece together the building blocks of a country? How do you create a functioning economy, rebuild infrastructure, and include everyone in the peace building effort? And you were talking about Bangladesh's struggle with socialist idealism and capitalistic pressure. And the angle of my question is, you also then work at the World Bank and talk about their perspective on almost like ivory tower social change and deployment
Mhm.
of capital without on the ground experience of asking people what they want. You know, what outcomes would you like
Right,
in our impact?
right.
And with that experience, you are doing these women's livelihood bonds and running IIX. What would you talk to about the thread you've sort of woven between these two things? Like, what would you say to other people about how they can weave their own threads?
Well, I think, I'm a great believer in people's voice. So I do think that, any country, any structure that's coming together, I think, people's representation and people's voice have to be there. And listen, I mean, I know it's easier said than done. I mean,
Mm.
a lot of the new countries, they usually have some sort of a leader who was the face of the nation as it came together, and the leader sort of finds, I mean, again, and history keeps on repeating itself, they sort of kind of, you know, become too big, for anyone else to handle. So I think that each country, when it becomes independence, I do feel they do go through their growing pains from the political side.
Mm.
However, there is an incredible, need on the public policy side to really be aware that the country actually needs not only just a leader, but a group of very, very strong, smart leaders.
Mm.
And I think putting the right sort of intellectual infrastructure as well as physical infrastructure is very, very important. It's interesting if you think about it, a lot of the times when countries are born, so much of it is happening with emotions. So, for example, I remember growing up, um, the country became independent, and you're right, it was very socialistic, and I also mentioned how English was taken away, as a
Mm.
language, and it was very interesting. For 10 years plus, there was no English.
Mm.
I mean, I didn't learn English in school, and I think the interesting thing is, if you, again, from a very much egalitarian point of view, it makes sense. Yes, everyone's speaking the same language. But then from a practical point of view, you had a whole generation, which is my generation back home, who really missed out, in being a participant in the globe from not knowing the language, right? So I do think that, again, having the proper infrastructure intellectually is extremely important. Having the voice is extremely important, and actually being able to question other people's motive, as the other countries are getting involved, when you're growing.
Yeah.
So for us, listen, with our bonds, with our work, we're not trying to change a country. We're just trying to play a role in giving a voice and a value to
Mm.
really people in the last mile. So we're leaving the politics and the growing the country to the rest, to the people of the country. But for us, it really is, what do you need? And for us, it really is important that every country, when we're going in, we study it, we actually spend time, we're in the field, we are with the people, and we work a lot with the SMEs, because we do feel that the SMEs are the essence of a growth of a country. Because again, SMEs, 70% of them globally are started by women. And also, if you look at it in every economy, I mean, it's just quite shocking where, again, women in general are half of the population of the economy. And yet, again, in general, they basically have less than 10% of the income of the country, And so for us, it's like, okay, if these are the things that we can tweak and fix with some financial instrument, why not? And that's exactly, what we are getting at. And there is so much more to be done. And I think, and we all have a piece, we can all have a piece of this complex puzzle to grow these economies.
Yeah. And when you mentioned a group of leaders underneath the leader of a new established country, the first thing that came to mind is obviously having gender equity, and that would be a very good start. Um, and then, and to be honest, I'm into meritocracy. I'm not into just gender equity by the numbers. And all I can tell is that my 80% of the people I work with are women because they're simply excellent at what they do, which is really
Right?
nice. It's
Yeah.
like I'd highly encourage everybody out there to, go on merit and just find awesome people and work with them, because all the women I meet are truly astounding for most of the things they do. And
And I think, also it's very interesting, and I've seen this across the board, no matter what the education level and whatnot. I think with women, we are just, I mean, again, it's just how we are wired. We do bring in, we can, one, multitask, I think, more effectively, but then also just bringing in others into the equation, and it just in everything we do. And I do feel like So you do get a different perspective and a different way of working, when you do have women colleagues. So I'm really glad you're doing that. Good for you, Philip.
And this one might be a bit pointy. We don't have to use names. You could just use broad waves of the arm. Though you stood with your sisters at the gate, handing out a cup of rice once a week in the Bangladeshi War for Independence, and you noticed how this doesn't change anything for those coming to you. And I'm wondering, where are you seeing people handing out cups of rice in the global impact movement?
Well, I think the reality is I do think the way the development is still viewed, I do think that it is something that is still coming from the global north, and it is something that is defined by the global north. And I feel that, to be very honest, I do feel that maybe the education system in the global north has sort of perpetuated it, where you do have, and listen, I went to one of those universities as well, where this whole notion of kind of a savior attitude is very much instilled, right? So where we need to actually go there and develop them, we need to go and tell them how to fix things, and because they really don't know how to do it. And I think that sense will obviously, I do feel the work that's happening in the impact investing space may be changing it a little bit. But I do feel that I feel sad that the impact investing was going to be something that was going to be the great equalizer of the global north and south, which frankly has not happened. It's still very much now being manipulated by the global north. And to some extent, I have to say, to a great extent, I have to kind of blame the global south as well on that, because we do have now a lot of wealth in the global south, but not the confidence that they can actually make their own decisions and they can actually use that wealth more effectively. They still look at global north, for that guidance, for that brand, for that acceptance into that elite class. So I do feel that that sadly is still very much playing out in this space. So, but again, I try not to sort of get too much into it and just sort of say, what, we're doing our work and we'll push on it, while others can just push each other out to see who can make it to Davos, type of thing, and keep on saying how one is more humble than the other, so let them do it.
I've got another quote from you here. When things reach a breaking point, sometimes sparks of defiant optimism create a moment when even the most difficult change seems possible. And that was related to watching the assassination of Benigno Aquino Jr. in the Philippines. And I hope I'm not giving away too many spoilers for the book here, because loads more in the book, I promise you. How was it to be there at that moment? That was such a point of like a
again, I watched it on TV, and it was you have to understand, I think, again, coming at that point when we moved from Bangladesh to the Philippines, for me, it was coming from a country which, again, sort of seeing all the political upheaval and all that, and coming to a country which I just felt was so much more developed, right? Oh my God, they have jeans, they have malls. What are malls? I've never seen any of these things. And to kind of see, but then this brewing kind of tension due to the intense inequality, and kind of saying, oh my God, actually under that veneer of things being developed, it's actually not, right? I mean, so much of inequality, so much of unhappiness among majority of the people, 90% of the people, and so much of corruption, from the existing regime. So to watch that it was really surreal, right? Because it really, so much hope was on Aquino that he was going to come and change things, and this man is walking down literally the stairs in the plane, and he gets shot, and we saw this live. So for me, it really was, and maybe it's sad. I guess I've seen things like this a little too much in my life, just because of being in the places I've been at. But it was just crushing. It was truly crushing. But I will share something with you, Philip, which is, I'm really glad. I think maybe, who knows? I think I have a feeling the book will be banned in the Philippines, because I just found out I met someone from the Aquino family, and who said that this entire history of the people power and Aquino assassination and so on and so forth is being erased from the Philippine history books now.
Wow.
So for me, and they could not believe it, me as a foreign woman who wrote all this in the book.
Mm.
And I think for me, it was just, I was like, you know what, if nothing else, at least this part of the book, I hope that people will remember that this is what happened in that country, because it was incredible courage that people showed
Yeah.
when people power happened, and when there was a call to actually have a more egalitarian, country. So
Mm.
we are thrilled that we can do all this work in the Philippines, and we are sort of pushing on it and continuing our work there. It's an incredible country, and but
Yeah.
very
Wow.
troubled history.
I wish you all the best with that, because I
Yes,
can understand the
yes,
link there between what you're telling me and the impact it may have on the ground.
yes.
And
So we'll see. Keep our fingers crossed.
speaking of you being a notable rebel, so you're at college, you're sitting in the snow protesting against apartheid South Africa, asking your college to divest. And I quote you, "I learned that the best way to make those in power feel pain was through economic pressure." And this giving birth to socially responsible investing, or SRI. How's
Yes.
that going? We still using that as a lever? Is that still working?
I think the thing is, I always say that, and again, that was my first taste of activism, which was brilliant. And again, my college was not the only one. I mean, it was across the US, many
I
universities.
was born in Cape Town, so, and we left during
Oh, okay.
apartheid. So
Oh, okay.
yeah,
All right. So I think I just found it always amusing in my passport, the balance sheet passport, it always says all the countries of the world except Taiwan, South Africa, and Israel. So for me, South Africa always like, oh my God, so that made me even more curious, to read every book I could find, and every author from South Africa. But going to the US and sort of getting that sort of desire to kind of make that connection with the country, not that I've ever been to South Africa, was incredible. And I think the thing is, I do feel that activism has a very strong role to play. But then from activism, it actually has to turn into action. And that is where I think sometimes the political levers, get into shape, which happened obviously with South Africa. But I think sometimes when the political levers are not there, that means that other things have to jump in. And that's frankly where I do feel that, in this case, impact investing can play a role. I really feel sad how, again, it has been politicized now in the US. And that makes it even doubly more important for us to kind of keep on pushing and showing that this is something real and this can actually make a difference. And it is making a difference. So yes, but I do feel that activism has to be there, just as philanthropy has to be there, because we all have a role to play, and it's a spectrum, right? It's a spectrum of where you get involved. And I think if I didn't do that activism part, and we still do a lot of it, I don't think I'd be here today. I mean, case in point, Orange Bond, it's again, it's for women, girls, and gender minority. And can you imagine the number of countries we work in where it's not even acknowledged? So, and it's a crime, to be a gender minority. So for us, again, that's the activism part for us. But then we very quickly link it to money. And all of a sudden you have, people don't really question it. So, so money does have power, sadly, but it does.
Yeah. I quote you again, "No joy compares to helping someone find their dignity and showing them the source of their own power." I think this was in the chapter about you teaching women to sign their own signature. Though, as we're talking about providing loans and providing economic power to people to shape their own destiny, the essence of microfinance, the essence of loans for these organizations, for these minorities you're talking about, which really aren't minorities. They are the majorities in these places.
Yeah, the majority of the world, exactly.
Yeah, they're just not empowered because of systems.
Right.
And another quote, "Implicit biases and invisible systemic barriers." Could you take me through some examples of those?
I actually have a folder in my email, which is called, I think one is called bias, and the other one, I have on basically the, the inequality. And it's very interesting. I keep these emails, and where even it's incredible where people, the things they write to me, even, as recent as I would say just a few months ago, someone told me, you don't act like a woman from a developing country. And I said, how am I supposed to act? And he said, you're supposed to be much more, you know, accepting of your position and willing to basically accept what you're given.
Wow.
And this was from, again, a person who works in one of these developed countries and one of their donor agencies. And so it made me, again, I said, wow, this really doesn't go away, right? So, and I think the context I wrote it down in the book was when I was, you know, when I was starting my first company and when I was going out there and trying to raise capital. It is quite remarkable when someone walks in, which in this case me, through the door, and immediately there's a bias against you, right? I'm of the wrong gender, of the wrong race, and it's just, I'm just put in that box that they just throw the key away then from that box. I cannot get out, no matter what I say. And it was very interesting for me to be in that situation when I knew kind of it was there, but I said, no, you know what? I have the right degrees, you know, I have the right credentials. I made all this money for when I was in corporate America, you know, for the companies. I have every box checked. The only thing you know, I can't change my gender, I can't change my color, but everything else I have, it's my mind, right? That they are going to be sort of, you know, reviewing me on, and that didn't happen.
Yeah.
So I do feel that, unfortunately, it is definitely there. And that bias, trust me, Philip, is there even today. And what I don't go into detail in the book, you know, when I started IX, one of the big things I realized was something so crazy, so impossible, so out there, that I almost had to accept some of the biases which were there. And for me to kind of say, okay, I accept it. It's very distasteful, but I will do what it takes to overcome that bias. So what does that mean? So yes, you know, the investors, for them, if you can imagine, the things that we're doing was so crazy and out there, they would never believe me if I went out and told them this. Because again, I would walk into the room, already they have risk written all over me on my forehead. So what I actually did was have Caucasian men and Chinese men basically meet with the investors.
Yeah.
And I had to do that because for me, again, was I proud of it? Absolutely not. But was I practical and was I glad I did that? Absolutely. So I think for me, I had bigger war to fight, and I could lose the battle of feminism at that point.
Yeah.
So for me, it really was that I realized with IX, a lot of the decisions I took were things where I lost the battle for to win the greater war. And I'm glad I did that.
Yeah, thank you. It's, you know, that was rolling into a question I was going to ask you about. If you want to change the system, you need to know how it works and who you would direct that to. And then I feel like you are circling around that. And high five to you for what you told the bankers after the Christmas party. You'll need to read the book if you want to know more about that, but go you. I raced up and I told Nick, I'm like, you got to read this. So yeah.
I think what we have been able to do is, and which I feel very proud about, is we have been able to show women and underserved community as, frankly, the solution maker rather than victims. And I think this is something so important. So for me, the fact that you know, I had to stay in the background while, you know, we had to go and sell these, and I had to have the right packaging to sell it. You know, I'm glad we did that so we could actually bring the women in the last mile as the powerful solution provider. You know, I'm completely not relevant in this equation, and I'm so glad. And that's exactly how it should be, right? That's exactly how it should be. So if you think about it, you know, even with all our work and including the bonds, they're seen as something so amazing and wonderful. And not a single time anyone says, oh my God, and you know what, those poor women, and you know, and I am helping those poor women. No, you really are not. You're an investor and you're getting money from those women. And those are strong women who is actually paying you and sitting literally on this table across the globe on on equal footing with you. So I'm so happy, Philip. You know, I'm so happy that we could actually really, you know, turn the table, you know, and make you know, basically this incredibly wonderful opportunity for equality. I mean, how powerful is that, right?
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. I mean, I think I was using Kiva before I even started Bravo Charlie like 14 years ago. It's just been so fun
Right.
to like see all these people who are like, hey, I want to do this. And
Exactly.
then
Exactly.
they pay me back. I don't have a default rate either. It's amazing because they,
It's a big
why would you?
organization. Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and when we talk about these systemic biases and the implicit biases and the invisible systemic barriers, I've got two things I've paired here. You talking about your second child, Aliyah, I believe. Aliyah?
Alia.
Aliyah.
Alia.
This benevolent one would help me ascend to new levels of self-discovery. And I've paired it with the sentence that education is about changing minds and hearts. It's about rendering fear and anger into courage. And I feel like the work you are doing is taking those implicit biases and those systemic barriers and turning that fear and anger into courage.
Yeah, yeah. And this is now where I'm going to start crying. You know, it was very hard for me to write that. Um, um, because, you know, I have two amazing daughters, and you know, listen, I mean, they paid a price as well for me to be so crazy and be, you know, pushing my dream. But I have to say, having Alia was, wow, it was such an incredible gift. It was such an incredible um, awakening for me, in terms of sort of understanding. Really, I thought I knew everything about lack of inclusion, and just sort of, you know, having this precious little thing in my arm and realizing, wow, you know, she will never be accepted. And I think being able to sort of push on that and being able to sort of get that, you know, courage from her to say, you know what, I will do everything to make this an equitable world. You know, I mean, that's what will make me wake up in the morning. And I think you know, the interesting thing is, and I think just on that, which is not in the book, um, I realized after having Alia how also, and again for the readers, for those of you who haven't read the book yet and who are going to get it, so Alia was born with a very rare genetic condition, which is not curable, and which, you know, basically makes you look different. And it's very interesting because in Asia, we do have a hard time accepting people who are different. And basically the children who are different, be it any sort of challenges, be it mental, be it physical, be it appearance wise, they're actually not brought out in the public. So I created an organization with the doctors from the KK Hospital, which is Children's Hospital here, literally to bring these children out, in Singapore. And I remember our first thing was to just take them to the zoo, and take them, you know, just to kind of take them out during daytime, because these kids are only used to coming out at night. And it was so powerful just to kind of see these kids feeling like they are one of the bigger community. So I do feel that, you know, it is, again, you know, things happen in life, I feel, for a reason. Everything has its own blessing, I would say. And yeah, and this was one. Trust me, I really struggled with it, whether to write it or not. And I did, because I realized without her, I probably would have never created IX. So I had to write it, you know, and also the profound effect it had on our entire family, and what it meant. And yeah, so it was, yeah, I cried a lot. Even now I'm like, you know, I'm tearing up, because it was very hard. It was very, very hard. Yeah, to relive all that.
No, I'm really glad you did. I think I had my first experience of spending time with a broken down rickshaw in India, doing a drive through India in a rickshaw when there was a young kid helping us, and then there was a community helping us, and then when it came to taking a photo with everybody, they just kept pushing this kid out of the photos because he couldn't be in it because he was untouchable. And I kept pulling him back in, going, I don't understand what's. I'm like, oh, there's an alive and well caste system, and he can't be in this. And
Oh God.
I got him in, but it was my first like real visceral experience of like excommunicating somebody who was present in the room.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's very interesting. Alia wrote this very touching piece, and I think, and she got like a New York Times award for it, but during COVID, and she wrote this piece. I was just, I couldn't stop crying when I read it. It was literally how through COVID, at last, the global population understood what it meant to be different and when you're actually excluded from a society.
Wow.
I know, oh, it was so powerful. It was so powerful. And which is true, right? I mean, we all for the first time experienced that. And I think, and again, if you think about it, what we are working with, in IX and you and so many of us is really that 99% of the world population who are excluded, if you think about in a greater sense as well, right?
Yeah.
From the financial system and all that. So it all kind of, if the circle just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So,
Yeah.
but it has to start somewhere.
Yeah. And for the sake of time, I'm going to skip the whole section about you spending 2 decades in America and your transition from America back home to
Right,
Singapore,
right.
because you're going to need to read the book. Though, jumping ahead, quoting you again, I was a banker, I was a social entrepreneur, I was a media executive. Now I am a professor. Here I am teaching all of you, brilliant minds from all over the world, about social innovations. Do you know why? What's the answer? I want to know why.
Well, they have to read the book, right?
Oh, okay.
Well, no, well, the thing is, this is again because I had the opportunity and it was a wonderful experience to teach at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. Um, and it was, I always, again, it was just quite something because I'm teaching to all these people who are going to be government official or were government officials. So my big thing was, I'm teaching this all to you because you can make some entrepreneur's life very miserable. So you need to you need to kind of know this and make it easier and play your part, frankly, for a more equitable society, because the government does play a big role in this. So I was happy that I could do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. And you've mentioned a few times what you didn't put in the book, but is there anything you would add to that list?
I think what I didn't put in the book, quite a bit of it was honestly was my professional side, my time when I was in media. And I think the publishers thought that it was sort of would digress quite a bit if we put it in there. But I do feel that maybe it's going to be in the next book, but I do feel just as the financial system plays a big role in, influencing our lives, I do feel media plays a big role. And I do feel that, we have the power through media to really shape the mind. And especially now, listen, I mean, with social media, God, I mean, they're shaping everything. So I do feel that the media angle, I wish, I could have put more in it, but all of that was taken out. The book was 700 pages. So, a lot had to be cut. So, that's okay. So for the next book, I have material. So
yeah, wonderful. And I mean, hey, that's why I run Bravo Charlie, because if you tell your story the right way, you get to do what you want to do in the world. It's just connecting it with the audience. So, so as we wrap up, what's your advice to women and people of color who want to start a career in the financial space?
My advice to them is know your stuff. I think that's one of the most important and probably boring advice, but I do feel it's very, very important, and especially if you're a woman and a person of color, where sadly, even now, you will be given that you have these unspoken biases. You have to wow them with your mind. And that means that you actually have to know more than anyone in that room. So know your stuff, really, if you're going into it, know your finance inside out, know if you're going to be in the impact investing space, know how to measure impact, know how to actually connect the dots between economic development and finance, and be open-minded about sort of taking the the leap of courage in being innovative, because I do think that sometimes when you are a minority, you want to stay quiet because, you're like, my God, it took me so much to get here. And if I say something, I will be kicked out. So I do feel that it just sort of holds a lot of us back. But I think that's where we need the most courage. And you can have the courage if you have done your work in terms of being ready to take it on. So I do feel that boring stuff of getting ready and studying and getting the right qualifications, I think it does matter, especially for us.
And handily, we know a good place where you can do that study and get ready.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Philip can give you the recommendation, IX Institute.
What have you changed your mind about through this process, this time writing the book? What have you changed your mind about?
What I've changed my mind about is the fact that, I thought I could control a lot of things. And I think when I sat down and I wrote the book, I always say it's the most cathartic thing you can do as a middle-aged woman. I realized that, most of the things in life you can't control. So I think kind of having the grace to accept that and making the best of it. I think that was a big one. I always think, oh my God, yes, you can do it. I will do. But again, just sort of stepping back and just having that wisdom of saying, what you can change and what you can't. So I think that the book at least made me realize that as I was writing.
Yeah, wonderful. And is there anything I haven't asked that you wanted to speak to?
What makes someone a defiant optimist? So I think the first point on that, as I wrote here, is to dare to imagine a better world and improve the lives of those around us, whether in our local community or on a global scale. And I do believe that. I think we have to, again, to kind of end on the note of think of others, as we're thinking about ourselves. So I think, that really does make us unique. And I hope, people take away that message from the book. So, and thank you, Philip, for giving me the opportunity to talk about it.
It's been a real pleasure. And thank you so much. And for the listeners out there, from a communications perspective, make sure to have a look at the Investor Trust Scorecard that I've just released, because it might be quite useful for you. And there'll be links to Durreen's work and all of this in the description and so on and so forth. So thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to get on to editing this and get it out into the world.
Great. Well, thank you, Philip. Again, many, many thanks. You've been very, very kind.
Okay.
Always really appreciate it. Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.